Good evening, and hello. This evening's Dharma talk is titled Christian Dior. No, it's close though. It was a conclusion doors, similar. Conclusion. Anytime you come to any conclusion, whether it's just the causes and conditions that arise where you just suddenly see something a certain way, or whether you see something a certain way and then you cover it up with a conclusion, that takes a lot of awareness training to see the difference between those. This is called discriminating awareness wisdom, the beginning of it. It is not about picking and choosing. It's about seeing the fundamental difference between the clarity of the mind and the continuous pile of rubble that is created by the self-centered, grasping, passion, aggression, and ignorance awareness that is shows up as narcissism, as a self, as somebody who wants something else. Doesn't want this. I don't want that. I don't want that. I want this. I need to get what I want. Most of the world is operating that way, even though they might not be that rude about it. So it's like a door. When you conclude anything, it is like shutting a door on your awareness or on your perception of what this whole situation is, fundamentally. And it's the beginning stages of that, of being 15 years old or 100 years old. Wherever you're at with that is to shut down out of, it could be out of hope, but probably it's out of fear of not getting what you hope for. And we can spend weeks, years, months. You can spend a whole lifetime just in the heaven realm, just in a realm where everything's fine. I don't see any problem with anything. I have what I want. I'm white, for one thing. In my case, I'm a man, so lucked out there in terms of our society. You guys know what I'm talking about, whether you're a white male or you're otherwise. It's difficult whoever you are, but that tends to add up pretty fast to some kind of conclusion or door closing based on what the culture has been teaching you and telling you and rubbing into your mind stream over all of this time. So the sitting practice of meditation is about recognizing that, seeing that I can't do it for you. I can give Dharma talks and you can ask questions, and the better the questions, the better the response. It's always mutual. It isn't like it's like I don't know exactly what to say at any given time. This particular talk title just shows up and I don't know where it comes from. As I said, it started out with Christian Dior, which might have been a more confusing talk. And it's so tempting. It's so, we feel it's kind of a compulsion to try to stop that, stop doing that, or stop closing, stop concluding, stop doing it. And I say over and over again, and I'll say it now, not about stopping the conclusion. It's about being aware of it. And that's painful. That can be difficult because, especially if pride is operating, we don't want to be the person who is helpless. We don't want to be the person who is feeling like they're failing at something or just not good at something, not doing so well. We'll run that by, in order to keep the ego, the self-centeredness supported on some level, on some relative level. We'll run that trip on ourselves over and over and over again. How we're not quite getting it, or if someone is not quite treating us with respect. Notice that one? Like you're supposed to get your respect from someone else. Seems to be necessary to do it with awareness. So you could say, yeah, we've said that, but But how do we do that? What does that mean? The way we do that is to look at anything that's moving insofar as we can without anything extra. No, nothing added, nothing subtracted, nothing ignored. That's basically the practice of awareness, simply put. And when we do that, when we practice, when we have an understanding of that, and we endeavor to do that, then the practice becomes noticing how we're kind of approximating that, but there's something we're not quite seeing. And then over time, we notice the subtle adding is coming from somewhere. And that could come from a whole closet full of ignored crap. And that could be, as you've heard me say before, that could be from how you were treated when you were 4 years old, how you were treated before this lifetime. Excuse me. Or it could come from other deep sources that I refer to this area as deep consciousness, because it's the layers of consciousness that are probably layers that go on and on and on and on. They don't stop. There's no limiting to that area. But we tend to limit it, just like we have our door of our conclusion about things, so we don't have to be frightened by the unknown. And why are we frightened by the unknown? Because we think there's something that is known. We think we know who we are. I am Jim. I'm Bob. I'm Phil. I'm Mary. I'm Jane. I'm some kind of person. And quite often we'll hear ourselves, if you begin to observe your mind stream when it's hooked up to your vocal cords, occasionally we'll hear ourselves say to somebody, well, I've always thought this, or I'm the kind of person who, as soon as you hear that out of anyone's mouth, I don't care if they've been meditating for 30 years, they're concluding. So again, going by the whole thing one more time, it's not about controlling it or stopping it, even though I might say, don't conclude. I know you can't do that. You've heard me say this probably hundreds of times. But you can just watch the way some aspect of the consciousness begins to shut down. And some other aspect of the consciousness through mind training starts to get stronger, and notice the shutting down. And then some other addition might come along, like, I don't want to shut down. I don't want to be that kind of person who's shutting down. Right back to what? The self-centeredness and manipulation and control, and just a pretty firm unwillingness to relax and watch what moves. Sit down, hold still, just relax. Watch the movement. And if we begin to buy into some kind of a credential, excuse me, about knowing if we're succeeding at that, am I doing better at that? Am I beginning to be somebody who's more aware? Am I more aware? That credential, that wish or desire for some kind of proof, takes us into another layer, another lamination of self-centeredness. Have I made myself clear? Apparently I have, because nobody's asking any questions. And you don't have to. I can continue to talk. This seems to arise in such a way that the initial movement of it looks like we're going to be able to see it. But the thing, and we might, but what happens is we have a preconception about what it's going to look like to see that we're concluding, see that we're closing, that we're ignoring. We have a preconception about what that is. So we continue to do what? Look at the preconception rather than the actual ignoring. Because to look at the actual ignoring, you're going to get a pretty good view of the slipshod manner in which the ego mind is stitched together by concepts and by open fear. And it's polished off by the conceptual mind comes in and is just puts a which it puts a covering over that of concepts, so you can't really investigate it any further. It seems to it will feel like you're protecting yourself. So the concluding idea, as I said initially, is the concluding idea just can be the conclusion that you look outside and you see that there's some smoke. Might conclude maybe something on fire, someone's burning leaves. Those kinds of conclusions that come up spontaneously just because the environment you're in, you're very aware that you're in a building, or you're very aware that it's fall. There's all of those things come together just instantly, and you have a conclusion, or you might have a conclusion, or might have a suspicion that something's on fire that need to look at it. And those are all totally appropriate. What starts to happen is we start to abandon that which is dependently arisen and which makes some sense and is appropriate, and the paranoia of the mind starts to show up, and we start to invent things that aren't actually true. That's not particularly a good example. It could be, but it's like that. It's like when we see a scowl on someone's face, is the one that I've used before, or we hear someone's tone of voice, and it really, instead of really looking at receiving what that is, we conclude something about it. You all know this is very simple stuff. You all know what I'm saying. In a conversation, we listen to what someone is saying, and instead of actually hearing what they're saying, we conclude, or we come to a conclusion about what they're saying, which may involve judgments, opinions, concepts, ideas about them and about their relative validity or their relative honesty. Very interesting area. It's difficult, if not impossible, to just be present. You can't actually be present. You have to. How do you do that? You have to notice the way you keep taking a hike from what this is. We just keep abandoning the very situation that's in our face because that which is in front of us is not separate. But the self-centered mind, as soon as that starts to show up as a possibility, the self-centered mind comes up with various kinds of conclusions about this. So what I say over and over again, I encourage you, don't believe me, but you're listening to me, so therefore I respect you, and I feel like you respect me. So I've been doing this for a while, so I might have an understanding that might be a little bit more extensive than yours. And I would say, don't believe a word I say, but train your mind. Slow down, hold still, don't add. If you come to conclusions, be very tentative about those conclusions rather than have a conclusion and then lock the door on it. I mean, that door won't hold still. It will swing. Take some questions. Yes, Teresa, go ahead.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Contrary to what's traditionally taught, does the paranoid mind have a great deal of type of intelligence and what appears to be insight, Valley?
Well, yes, there's a lot of insight wrapped up in that. Absolutely. So we're not trying to get rid of the paranoid mind. Paranoia actually is insight. It's just that it's biased, and the bias comes from fear of something, of losing something, and the other way would be hope of gaining something, but usually it's fear of not getting what we want, or not having the protection or the confidence, the relative confidence that we're safe, and so on. So yes, it's all about intelligence that is extremely biased towards success and failure, right and wrong, up and down. All the polarities come into play in terms of that. Whereas wisdom doesn't have any favorites. More if you have it.
Teresa Belling, how do we recognize or untangle from that type of what appears so insightful, Belling?
You look at the tangle. I like that image. It is a tangle. It's a mess. You look at that, and we can't. When we look at that, quite often we immediately abandon the tangle for the conclusion. And just even looking at that and saying it's a tangle is a kind of conclusion. So we're actually naming it something. So there's something there. But as long as we stay with just the naming part, it's still thin enough to be transparent. Whereas if we go to why that's happening, then we're buying into a dependent origination. Not that we shouldn't. Then we're buying into cause and effect. What caused this? This caused that. That happened. So therefore, this happened. And it's not that we couldn't do that. You actually can do that. It's much easier to do that if there's no solid self. If there's no longer a belief in someone, then dependent origination becomes pretty obvious. And it's actually it's quite humorous the way people grab this and reject that, based on belief and disbelief. So yes, there's an image in the tradition, in the Tibetan tradition, about can't quote it, but it's a rather poetic image of the knot of ego unwinds in space. I mean, you don't have to unwind it. It's just awareness, because if you unwind it, then we have some kind of an unwinder guy, some kind of an action of unwinding, and we're right back to what? We're right back to relative truth. We're back to therapy, psychology, psychoanalysis. Not that that's wrong. That may be the only thing you can do, but it's not a spiritual path. The spiritual path transcends all of this. And I'm happy to respond to questions about that if you have them. I'll do my best. It's not easy to talk about that using relative language, but we have to do something. There's no problem. Sometimes mindfulness practice is taught as a solution to a problem, this is why I don't talk about people recovering from addictions. As if I'm recovered, the identity of someone who's recovered from it. And there was some insight into that, into the 12-step program, by saying, you get up, you introduce yourself as your problem. By saying, I'm an addict or alcoholic or something. So you kind of affirm that position, which there's some insight about that.
Oh, you're bowing. Is there a way to tell if our conclusions are habitual? Bowing.
Like if they keep happening over and over again.
Or is that something that we should be looking for?
If you just get it into view, it might be the first time you actually realize that that's been happening and happening and happening. You're doing that over and over again. The conclusion that there's a self. If you see that there's no self, I'm not saying that the temptation to conclude won't show up. The self, which is unreal, seems even more real when you realize it's unreal. It's kind of like how real a Stephen King movie is. But then it's more entertaining. Then you kind of see that you're actually concluding things, that there's someone concluding things. And so it's and even if you were to begin to get angry about something, or some kind of anger arose around that unreal self, and I've said several times, and I'll say it now, it's not about getting rid of ego. See that it's unreal. If you try to get rid of it, then you build up another kind of person who's gotten rid of ego. Pretty good, actually. No longer vain, no longer self-centered. I'm just all about helping humanity. That's what really concerns me, is helping others. Maybe. And you,
Question from Joseph in Kalamazoo.
Joseph in Kalamazoo, yes.
What distinguishes observations from conclusions?
The observation is receiving. If something is coming and you're observing what's coming towards you or what's showing up, you're just observing. And conclusion is adding or projecting onto something or shutting down or having a judgment. So it's producing. So simply put, just receive. You're going to produce something, but it's good if the production comes out of your understanding of what is showing up rather than your conclusions about what is showing up, which is more production. So in other words, if you see what something is, then you may do something, but it needs, in terms of intelligence, it needs to come out of what's happening, the actual dependent origination, not your ideas about the good side and the bad side, the bad person, the good person. I'm really good, they're really bad, they should, I should, they shouldn't. Constant discursiveness around the whole thing. Instead, you can just don't do anything. And then what does show up will be about what's showing up, very simply put. So producing, what happens is things happen and then we don't see the production because we don't see what is there. We actually produce something on top of what is there. Instead of seeing a hornet, we see flying through the air, we see some aspect of that is a lamination on top of it. Not that we don't see an insect, but there might be some kind of something happening on top of that. That might not be a very good metaphor. It might be better to say when we do it with people, with family members or people that we're close to, we tend to add things on to what's actually showing up or happening. And then we start to react to that instead of the dependent origination that is dependently the truth. Dependently originated, it's a relative truth. It's still not real, but it's relatively real. And the relative reality of the tree falls down and makes a noise it's just a very simple cause and effect situation that we're relating to rather than our projection on top of it and relating to that rather than what is dependently arisen. It's a subtle area and it takes work. When I say work, I'm saying being mindful or aware would be a better word, being aware of what's coming and going. Mindful is more like, I don't use that word much because it's more like tracking things, being and the identity of being someone who's mindful. Whereas being someone who's aware, it doesn't work too well. Awareness can't really find an identity. Did Shoka leave? Or did you just having a cigarette?
He just told me he was leaving early today.
Oh, okay. Well, he doesn't smoke anyway, does he? Much. Further questions? Anyone else on the Zoom have a question? It's going to be pretty boring if you don't ask me some questions. Yes. Well, thank you.
Thinking of the example you gave with the hornet and we project on it, an example I see at work sometimes is I'll see a political flag and I have a feeling about it. Is there any truth to the feeling?
Yeah, it's dependently arisen. It's dependently true. Yeah, we see political flags driving in here tonight. It's like you wonder how that shows up in the mind of a person who would do such a thing, and how there can be so many people that are interested in things like that. But this is what the question was today from someone from Elna, is when why do people? Can you remember how she said that? It was a good question. She said, "Why do people identify with somebody?" Did you take a note?
Authoritarian.
Huh?
When you're bowing, she asked about authoritarian
Yes.
and
Yeah.
personality.
And I don't remember exactly what I said, but it's It's like some people identify with the with their mother or their friends or their political party or something like that. And quite often, what happens when it seems to be very bizarre, when someone quite crazy, like an oligarch or something, it's all about controlling people. It's totally selfish and self-centered and so on. Is that what happens is in people's consciousness, without that showing up, then that area of one's consciousness is at least temporarily stable. They still have these kind of thoughts. But when someone shows up that resonates, that is on a frequency that is the same frequency as the self-centeredness that has been covered up, because society doesn't approve of that. Suddenly you've got a person who's beyond the society situation, who's resonating that way, whether it's Stalin or whether it's Hitler or whether it's other people that are nameless. Then you get people that are, this is my guy. This guy doesn't take anything off anybody. He's gonna drain the swamp and all that. So it's an interesting area to look at, but it's still just people trying to be happy. People trying to squeeze happiness out of something. And a lot of that comes out of just frustration over what's been going on in politics for decades, well, since it started. People get tired of that, and so somebody comes along and makes a few promises or doesn't seem to care about anything and is a very actually gets his or her kind of identity out of just being wild and crazy, unpredictable, and doesn't care about any laws or rules or anything. It's just me. Sometimes we resonate with that. That also can happen with the teacher. If one's teacher is, to make it very relative, is grounded not in a self or in self-centeredness or an ego, but is grounded in the truth, fundamental, ultimate truth. And if that starts to resonate with you, then you might find yourself as a student. I often say I don't know what I am or who I am. I just know if there's people that need my help, I will help them based on how this looks. So some teachers need followers. Some don't. It's an interesting area because it's a very similar kind of because we're all, as long as we're in a relative realm, it doesn't look pure, it looks contaminated. And the one who realizes sees it as a pure appearance. That's difficult to understand because people say, well, yeah, but you can't just let everybody, you can't just ignore politics or whatever. So it's not about ignoring, it's about including. Questions are good. You shoot.
Question from Melissa in Portland.
Melissa in Portland.
My partner and I had a tiff today about how she deals with her addict son and her own self-care. How can I look at my thoughts and feelings without doing anything, even when it impacts me directly?
It's because of the causes and conditions that are arising in your dynamic with some besides yourself, with your partner and with offspring or children. It's just insofar as you can, hold your seat as much as you can and keep it zipped. Don't say much. I know that may not sound so great. Isn't there some kind of constructive advice? I would have to actually talk to them or talk to you more about that, which I'm happy to do. And there may be something you can do. But when it comes to relationship stuff, that's like lots of knots in space, all trying to get along and believing one thing I say often, don't believe your thoughts, but don't disbelieve them. Don't look away, don't ignore them, don't shut them down, but don't believe them as some kind of credential for acting or credential for not acting. So I think it helps if you realize that your partner wants to be happy, your partner's child wants to be happy, and people just have odd ways of going about that based on causes and conditions that they are blind to. They can't see them. And when there's no mind training, people just grasp at anything they can to substantiate, reify, validate, and protect and give nutrition to a self that is unreal. And we'll do it. We'll claw our way along, and we'll do that right up to the moment where the body mind goes back into the elements, and then this whole thing breaks down. And that same grasping, passion, aggression, and ignorance does not stop because it's tied into the awareness. It's tied into the consciousness. And it may show up again, it may not. But the causes and conditions that arise that support that or don't support it are untraceable. We can't find that. But we can, while we're alive and sitting here, standing here, walking around here, we can see the incredible knot that our mind of passion, aggression, ignorance makes for us. It's just painful, and sometimes it's just terrifying. We can't do it ourselves without some kind of help, some kind of teaching or feedback or support. And if somebody doesn't want that, if they'd rather have some other direction, another way to go, there's not much you can do about it. Sokuzan.
Do you work with a conclusion that has really solidified itself deep within yourself?
Do I?
No. How do we work with conclusions that are like long solidified? Something I was talking to you about earlier this week was this identity of being in pain. Like that is something that no matter what I do, it's like steel.
I just think it's a matter, insofar as I understand, I remember what you were saying, what you were talking about. It's about persistence. There's no way to know the causes and conditions that show up as that kind of a situation. It's showing up just like your body-mind complex is here. Your body is here. No matter how much you meditate, the shape of your hands is not going to change. There's certain things, there's certain causes and conditions that are already in motion, just like the political situation. You can't fight that. There's too much momentum, too much force, too much momentum, I think is a good word for it. And the momentum that is showing up in your situation, the way I don't know how I said it before, but I'm saying it now, is a Dharma gate. And if you can, don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away from it as much as you can. And it can get more painful. It can get less painful. It's a relative truth, so it could do just about anything. But if you take anything that is happening there and add to it, well, that's proof this is happening, or it's going away, so that must mean I was right. I need to drink more water. I'm not saying that there isn't something like that happening, but to find out fundamentally what the cause and the effect is very, very difficult. More?
Just also wondering about working with identity. When we step on the Buddhist path, there seems to be a shift in identity by name and clothes. And I'm just wondering if there's always a strategy when we shift identities.
There's a strategy until there's not. And then when there's no strategy, then you're even more aware of what kind of self-centeredness is still hanging out in your consciousness. I mean, it may be unreal, but it can still show up and create disturbances or create difficulty or frustration. But if you're clear about this, then it's not a big deal. It just comes and goes. As long as there's a body-mind complex, it's like. I can't remember which teacher it was, but said someone was asking the teacher, well, I hear Buddhists talk about bliss. What is bliss? How can you describe? It was either a Kenpo or a Rinpoche in the Tibetan tradition. And you've probably heard me talk about this because I've mentioned it a few times. But the response was, and this is somewhat of a paraphrase, but pretty close. He said, well, what that is, you might call it suffering. you might call what is called bliss suffering, because the bliss that is seen there is not separate. There isn't anything separate from it. Everything is pure appearance. So, but there's still nerve endings. There's still there still may be desire coming and going, but there's no one who's desiring anything. There still may be fear, but there's no one. There's no individual that has been transcended or seen through. Seen as unreal, as transparent, translucent. Other questions? Shoto.
Earlier, you brought up paranoia as being biased intelligence. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, well, the paranoia is taking information that's coming this way and shifting and sorting and looking for loopholes and looking for positive situations that are supportive of an apparent identity and looking. So there's some kind of strategic thing going on there, like a detective. So there's some kind of insight that is, but it's highly relative. So it's looking for a kind of proof that it can hang its hat on, that it can say, oh, okay, I got that one. So it's looking for, there's some kind of grasping mentality that is along with it, whereas the insight that we call prajna is not interested in conclusions. So it is not motivated by paranoia or self-centeredness that needs to protect. But it's the same kind of, and it's still just prajna. It's just relative prajna that is looking for angles and looking for success. And this isn't going to work over here. There's too many challenges over here, so it's sorting things out. Whereas the prajna is also sorting, but it's not sorting based on some kind of a desired conclusion. It's already seeing what it's looking for. It already is what it's looking for. Sometimes in the tradition is called threefold purity. No matter what direction you look, past, present, future, success, failure, is or isn't, all of those things are pure because they're not separate from each other. Whereas the paranoid mind is a kind of, you could say, descriptively, a low level prajna, which is looking at what's wet, what's dry, what's warm, what's cold, and the prajna that is prajna paramita, or the wisdom which is crossed over. It sees the duality, but it no longer is. It's not in business anymore. It's not in merchandising, trying to tit for tat kind of thing. It just sees reality as it is, and it shows up as all kinds of differentiation and desire. But there's no one. There's no beingness there. So it may be kind of a sparkling objectivity, but there's no subject that is witnessing that or saying that. It's self-existing. When I say sparkling subjectivity, I'm saying sometimes it's called empty and luminous. It's empty of any imputation or any ideas around it, and yet the very presence that is there is like light. Doesn't mean that you can run through that table. Go ahead.
I think you called it lower prajna. Does that stop functioning?
Might get stronger, but there's no one. There's no one who has an agenda or an axe to grind there. So, but that kind of seeing could get even stronger, and it would still be a dependent area there. So there would still be working with relative truth, but there would be no success failure situation happening. Yeah, you still could see who. You could still see who murdered the butler. Did you ever play that game? You could still see relative truth. You might see it more obviously because the kind kind of subjective bias that might have been going on before would not be there. So you might see even more clearly. But you also may not do anything about it because you're not working with praise and blame anymore. So you can see this did that, this caused that caused that. But because you can see deeply into this, you can see that you can't really blame anybody for anything. Even if somebody comes and kills somebody, there's still a cause and effect behind that person who did such a terrible deed. There's still some kind of cause and effect going on that causes that. Some kind of cause and effect that puts that person in the path of that knife. So we're not letting anybody off any kind of hook. There's no hook. And seeing that, simply put, is liberation. You're not freedom from something. Junju.
Another question from Melissa.
Melissa, yeah.
How do we look at anger and frustration without acting on it or making it a conclusion?
How do we do this without making it into a conclusion? How do we work with it? I just think you just have to be persistent. You have to spend time. My understanding, and I'm pretty biased because this is how I've been working with this since I met my teacher in the early 70s, is sit down, hold still, and watch the movement of the mind, and do a lot of it. When you get up off the cushion, then insofar as you can, try to watch what you're doing. Try to be aware of the thought patterns and notice when something happens, we tend to add something onto it instead of seeing what it is that is dependently arisen. There's no self in the skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness. There's no solid being anywhere. The illusion of a solid being is overpowering. And so therefore we get tied up in ourself and the otherness, the other person's personality, and their hopes and fears, and their blaming of us or blaming themselves. It's just it's constant, and people actually, by watching movies about this, we're entertained by seeing this, especially when it's a play. So it's like we really know this is untrue, but we kind of want to watch that some drama go through that. We want to be entertained by the plays or the movies or Shakespeare for that matter. But the way to try to respond more directly to your question, the way to do it is train your mind. Do it regularly. Sit down, hold still. You don't have to necessarily join Buddhism. I think it helps. Have a Buddha Dharma Sangha situation. I think it's powerful. It's helpful. Train your mind so that you're no longer believing your thought patterns. You're not ignoring them, but you're no longer assuming that anything you think or anything you feel is the truth. It's not that the feeling isn't true, but what the feeling is about is extra. Do it with awareness rather than with the thought process. But that doesn't mean kick the thought process out or stomp on your feelings or drug yourself or something so you don't have to feel anything. I'm not saying that. Include the feelings, include the thinking, but it's not necessarily valid.
Mark Bowing.
Mark.
I am an alcoholic, like if I had diabetes. I don't think I identify myself as that alone, but and I use that only in certain situations. I identify myself as an alcoholic.
Yes.
I'm just wondering whether I should stop doing that. Whether you recommend I stop going.
Oh, no. No, you're a sponsor for people who are working with alcoholism, and you talk to them, and so you need to just stay connected with that organization. Of course, no, you wouldn't do that. That and I kind of see where your question's coming from, but I wouldn't do that at all. Just, it's always about awareness. It's never about what's showing up in the awareness. That's very challenging because it's so tempting to just latch on to anything that happens in the mind. And as soon as you latch on, that is a conclusion. That is the door closes. And I'm just using a metaphor. It's not even a door. If it was a door, we could see it. We could say, well, I'm not going to close that door because I want to know the truth. So in your situation, I would just say, no, you use it to help people. That's what I get when I've talked to you since I met you 6 months ago. I don't see any reason to stop doing that. I've been in connected with AA and with Al-Anon and over the last 40 years. So I think it's a good program. It's a program that some people, that's the only thing they can do. They don't have any other resource. They might have to approach it that way, and it's a maintenance thing. So you have to keep going, and you have to keep reifying and reestablishing that situation. But it's a relative situation, but it needs to be met where it's at. Not everybody is ready to sit down and look at a wall for hours and hours and hours. Not everyone is ready for that. So I have nothing to sell in that regard.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Thanks.
We're very lucky to have you talk to them. Junshu.
We see that we're coming to a conclusion, and we see that we don't want to be the person who's concluding. How do we lose that war with ourselves?
I think first you should probably, since you asked the question, you should first look at the idea of what it would feel like to lose. It sounds like you're already losing. You're already losing. It's just that you're covering up the loss with not wanting to lose. It sounds like you're already losing. Just let it take you. Let it take you. I'm not saying go out and end your life. I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'm saying allow the feelings to come. Allow the feelings to wash through you. You can do it. I know you can do it. Just allow those emotions to come. With no resolution, no promise, no light at the end of the tunnel. None of that. More? I didn't say it was easy. You can do it. I know you can. Further questions? You can take another one. There's another question.
Anna Maria Bowing.
Anna Maria.
So, if I observe a situation comes up and this reaction that I have to what feels like the same situation, which is complete agony and fear and terror, and the conclusion there sometimes is, well, this comes up and it causes you that, so don't do that or don't show up for that anymore. But it feels kind of fishy. How can I work with that and expand, widen the picture and see what else is there? I'm talking about auditioning. All of a sudden, in the last 10 years, it's just terrifying and pure agony. And yet I still show up, and sometimes it feels like I'm like just gratuitous suffering. And it's confusing to me. So I guess my question is, what am I not including? Bowing.
So rather than say what you're not including, I think that's something that you need to look at rather than for me to point something out. And I could do that, but I think it's better for you to spend time on the cushion. I know you meditate. I know you meditate a lot. But I think that's where it's going to show up. It's just a matter of some kind of transitioning happening there, and you're not willing to let go of that identity of being an actor. You just don't want, you've got something locked down there. You want that. It's something that you've been very idealistic about. And also you've had some success at doing that. And you're some kind of identity is tied up in that area. And I think that's what puts you in it, because the identity area is extreme, and it's got I don't know if you call it a vice grip, but it's got a strong grip there, and you're getting some kind of nutrition from that warfare. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. I mean, it's ridiculous to go and do something that is totally painful and suffering, and unless it's meditation, then of course it makes total sense. So I would, just this is showing up right now, I would say set it up for yourself. Do it with a form. Use a form rather than try to go in and arm wrestle yourself in space. I would say take 6 months off and say, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to take time off. I'm just going to maybe concentrate on some other aspect of your career situation. I know you're multi-talented as far as things that you can do. And so you might want to just stop it for 6 months. I sometimes tell people to just stop meditating for a while. Even 6 months. That's not happened lately, but people could just stop for a while, take a break from it.
Anna Maria Bowing. Would I know if I'm ignoring in that situation?
Knowing you're ignoring there's no way you can know that you're ignoring. There isn't anyone. So if you know that you're ignoring, then that's not exactly ignoring. That's someone with a concept of ignoring who knows something about the way that they're ignoring. And they already start to strategize about how they can change that or be someone who doesn't ignore. There's no way you can not ignore. Passion, aggression, there's no way you can get rid of passion, aggression, and ignorance. You need to watch those so that you don't continually reify, create, and construct an identity that is operating in the world in that way with those kind of difficult energies. That takes a while.
Bowing, I think you just nailed something. The identity of I want to be that person who doesn't ignore.
Of course.
That was a bullseye.
Yeah, you can't be. It's the being anybody. You want to be the Buddha. You want to be somebody who doesn't ignore. You want to be somebody who's sane. Look at the insanity. The very crazy, most horrible thing that's happening in your psyche, whatever it is, or in your mind, whatever fancy word. You have to look at it. Then you have to look at it and make friends with yourself. And that's my teacher said that very early in his teaching in the West, is that sit down, make friends with yourself. In other words, work with the very negativity that is giving you fits, that you're trying to get over, trying to get rid of. By doing that, you eventually will see, the idea there is that you see there is no solid being. And who you are is totally unthreatened by anything. And there isn't anything you can't handle. When I say handle, you're not concerned about what happens. The whole idea, the whole dynamic of something happening and not happening starts to change. As His Holiness the 16th Karmapa in 1981 on his deathbed said, nothing happens. He had a hell of a sense of humor.
Sorry.
Ms. Maria, go ahead.
Just thank you.
Maria Bowing. I was struck today during the daily Dharma gathering when you said that you lie all the time,
Yeah.
indicating that we all lie all the time. And here there is a kind of paradoxical dilemma we have when I'm looking at the notes which I create by using the word which Teresa gave. And yet those notes are created out of those lies, and yet I'm trying to understand what is there, which is kind of paradoxical. So I'm just wondering whether is that untangling of that knot happening just by looking at it, and does it happen to everything which is appearing in front of us?
Yes, yes, it does. Further question?
Mayabali, is this why Prajna is interested in seeing?
Interested in?
No. Seeing.
See, yeah. Hmm. Is that a trick question? Yeah, that's true. We want to see what this is. And sometimes we substitute all kinds of other things that will kind of satisfy us. But yes, it's called bodhicitta, the mind of awakening. Once this starts to show up, whether it's relative bodhicitta or absolute bodhicitta, once this starts to show up, the self-centeredness is on notice. Okay, we can close. So we do the. You know, have some coffee. Everybody's standing up, so I guess I better stand up. I don't want to be left out.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Chi ho san chi shi fu. Chi son mu sa mo ko sa. Mo ko ho ja ho ro mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.